Emily's heart raced as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail, the sun beating down on her small trunk that she held tightly in her lap. The landscape stretched endlessly, golden fields swaying in the breeze, jagged mountains looming in the distance, and the faint outline of a wooden ranch house on the horizon. Every creak of the wheels and jolt of the horses sent a shiver through her, reminding her that she was leaving everything familiar behind. She had answered the advertisement in the newspaper out of necessity, not hope, and now, faced with the reality of this remote western frontier, fear clawed at her chest. When the stagecoach finally stopped, she took a hesitant step onto the loose gravel, her boots sinking slightly into the ground. A tall, broad-shouldered cowboy emerged from the shade of the porch, his hat tipped low and a rugged beard brushing his strong jaw. His eyes, however, were sharp and kind, studying her as if trying to read the story she carried in her wide, frightened eyes. "Darlin, you made it," he said in a low, teasing drawl. "I don't bite unless." He let the words hang, playful, yet tinged with a rough humor that made Emily flinch despite herself. Emily's hands tightened around her trunk. She wanted to step back, but the stagecoach driver had already moved on, leaving her alone with this stranger whose reputation she didn't know. Her mind raced with warnings she had heard from other stories of mail-order brides being mistreated, left stranded, or worse. But here she was, and turning back was no longer an option. Jack, sensing her hesitation, smiled gently and walked toward her, reaching out a hand. "I'll help you with that," he said, nodding toward her trunk. Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming caution. Finally, after a long pause, she handed it over, letting him lift it with ease. The weight of the trunk seemed to symbolize the heaviness of her uncertainty, her past and her unknown future, all being carried forward onto this new land. The ranch itself was sprawling yet simple. A wooden house with a wide porch, a few outbuildings for animals, and fences that marked the boundaries of acres of untamed land. Emily's eyes darted around, taking in the open spaces, the distant hills, and the smell of hay mixed with the sharp tang of livestock. She had imagined ranch life in books and letters, romanticized and tame, but the reality was raw, loud, and intimidating. Every sound, the clanging of a bucket, the neigh of a horse, the whistle of wind through the trees, felt magnified in the stillness of the frontier. Jack led her toward the porch, speaking in a steady, calming tone. He told her about the house, the chores, the rules of the ranch, but always with a teasing edge that reminded her he had a sense of humor even in this harsh world. Emily tried to nod politely, but her stomach knotted with anxiety. She had to convince herself to trust him, even slightly, to survive here. Every instinct told her to retreat, yet something in his presence, the steadiness in his gaze, the confident way he moved, offered a faint thread of reassurance. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ranch, Emily took her first steps onto the porch, hesitant but determined. She knew the road ahead would test her courage, resilience, and heart in ways she had never imagined. Jack's half-smile and lingering glance were the first glimpses of connection in a world that felt alien, yet strangely full of possibility. That evening, as she set her trunk in the corner of her new room and listened to the distant sounds of cattle lowing and the wind rustling through the grass, Emily realized that she had arrived not just at a ranch, but at the threshold of a life that would challenge her fears and perhaps awaken her dreams. Emily awoke the next morning to a pale wash of sunlight spilling through the small window of her modest room. The distant sound of cattle lowing and the occasional clang of a metal bucket against the barn walls reminded her that the ranch was alive, breathing, and waiting for her to become part of it. She rose slowly, her body stiff from the long ride and the unfamiliar bed, and peered through the window at the sprawling land beyond. The mountains in the distance were jagged and imposing, yet beautiful in the soft morning light. The sheer expanse of the ranch both exhilarated and terrified her. She was so far from the comfort of her previous life that even the air felt different, cleaner, harsher, and somehow heavier with expectation. Jack was already outside, tending to the horses. Emily watched him from the window, noticing the ease in his movements, the way he handled the animals as if he and the ranch were one entity. There was a rhythm to his work, a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the chaos she felt inside. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach or observe from a safe distance. But curiosity won over fear, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, careful not to trip on the uneven wooden porch, and stepped outside. Jack noticed her immediately and tipped his hat in greeting. "Morning, Darlin. Sleep well?" His voice was warm, teasing, and oddly comforting, though Emily flinched at the familiarity. She managed a small nod. I think so," she replied, her voice shaky. She felt the weight of her new role pressing down on her, the expectation that she would adapt to this strange, demanding environment. He gestured toward the barn. "Come on, I'll show you the lay of the land." "There's a lot to take in," Emily followed, careful to match his pace. Every detail of the ranch fascinated her, the way the fence line stretched endlessly, the barn's worn boards telling stories of years of hard work, the scent of hay and leather, and the low hum of activity from the animals. She realized that this was not just a home but a living, breathing ecosystem that demanded attention, skill, and respect. As they walked, Jack pointed out the different animals, explaining their routines and needs. Emily tried to absorb everything, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and captivated. She watched him feed the horses, noting the tenderness in his movements despite the rugged exterior. "You take care of them, right?" he said, catching her glance. "They'll take care of you in return." Emily nodded, finding comfort in his words, even as her heart fluttered at the closeness between them. Her first attempts at helping were clumsy, her hands fumbling with the hay bales, her feet slipping in the dirt, but Jack was patient. He offered guidance without condescension, demonstrating the tasks and allowing her to mimic his movements. Slowly, she began to feel a faint sense of competence, a spark of confidence that she hadn't felt since leaving her old life behind. She noticed small smiles from Jack when she managed something correctly, a silent acknowledgement of her effort, and it made her chest tighten with an unfamiliar warmth. Despite the growing ease, fear lingered at the edges of her mind. Every gesture, every glance from Jack reminded her of the uncertainty that brought her here. Yet, as the morning passed and they moved together across the ranch, Emily began to see the man behind the rugged exterior, a man who was capable of tenderness, humor, and perhaps even companionship. For the first time since her arrival, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this life could hold something more than mere survival. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Emily had completed her first tasks with a mix of trepidation and pride. Standing beside Jack, looking out over the open fields, she realized that this was more than a home, it was a challenge, a promise, and an opportunity. And while fear still lingered, it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it was tempered by a tentative curiosity, a willingness to explore the unknown, and a fragile hope that the man beside her might not just be a stranger, but a companion in this new, rugged life. The days that followed Emily's arrival were a mix of wonder and exhaustion. Ranch life was nothing like she had imagined from letters and books. It was relentless, physical, and sometimes unforgiving. Her arms ached from lifting hay bales and mucking stalls, her fingers blistered from handling ropes, and her legs burned from climbing fences or chasing skittish animals. The sun was relentless, beating down during the day, while nights were sharp and cold, making sleep difficult. Every task reminded her that survival here depended on strength, endurance, and a willingness to keep moving despite fatigue. Emily often woke before dawn, the horizon just beginning to glow, and followed Jack through his morning routine. He fed the animals, checked fences, and tended to the fields with a precision born of years of experience. At first, she tried to mirror his movements, but she was slow, awkward, and unsure. Jack noticed her struggle but didn't chastise her. Instead, he offered quiet guidance, adjusting her grip on the rope, showing her the proper way to stack hay, or gently correcting her stance. "It's all right, Darlin. You'll get it," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily wanted to trust him, wanted to believe his encouragement, but old fears kept her on edge. The emotional toll was as heavy as the physical labor. Emily missed her family, the familiarity of her old home, and the sense of security she had taken for granted. She often felt out of place on the ranch, an intruder in a world of dust, hard work, and rugged independence. She feared failure, feared disappointing Jack, and feared the unknown consequences if she couldn't meet the demands of this new life. Every glance Jack gave her was scrutinized, every comment measured, and she worried endlessly about misinterpreting his intentions. Despite the unease, small victories began to appear. Emily managed to calm a skittish horse, earning a rare, approving nod from Jack. She learned the rhythm of feeding the animals, discovered how to mend a broken fence, and even managed to milk a cow without incident. Each success, though minor in the grand scale of ranch life, brought a surge of confidence. Emily realized that perseverance and patience were just as important as strength. These small accomplishments, paired with Jack's steady presence, began to chip away at her fear. Jack, in turn, noticed Emily's determination. He admired her resilience, her willingness to learn, and the courage she displayed despite her obvious discomfort. He began including her in small decisions, asking for her opinion on which pasture to use for the horses or how best to arrange the barn for winter. These gestures, subtle yet meaningful, made Emily feel seen not just as a helper or a newcomer, but as someone whose thoughts and presence mattered. Yet the tension between them lingered. Emily's fear of intimacy, of misreading Jack's rough humor for threat, created an invisible barrier. Jack's teasing comments intended to lighten the mood sometimes caused her to withdraw further into herself. Still, she couldn't deny the growing fascination she felt for him, his skill, his confidence, his rare moments of tenderness that betrayed the tough exterior. The push and pull between fear and attraction became a constant undertone in her daily routine, keeping her alert, cautious, and slowly curious. By the end of the week, Emily felt the first real shift within herself. She was exhausted, bruised, and still full of doubts, but there was a new layer of determination beneath the fear. She could survive this life, adapt to its challenges, and perhaps even thrive. The ranch was no longer just a place of uncertainty. It was becoming a proving ground for her strength, her courage, and her ability to trust. And as she watched Jack from the barn wiping sweat from his brow, she realized that he was not only her guide in this new world, but also an unpredictable, challenging, and compelling presence, one she couldn't help but notice even as she struggled to understand him. After the first grueling week, Emily began noticing subtle changes in herself and in Jack. The initial fear that had dominated her every thought was slowly being replaced by curiosity and cautious interest. The ranch no longer felt like a prison of endless chores. Instead, it started to feel like a place where small victories were possible, and where she could, bit by bit, carve out a space for herself. What made the days bearable, however, were the shared moments with Jack, moments that, though simple, allowed her to see his humanity beyond the rugged cowboy exterior. It started with chores that required teamwork. One morning, they were repairing a fence along the northern pasture. Jack handed Emily a hammer and nails, guiding her hands carefully. "Steady now. Just like this," he said, positioning the nail and demonstrating the swing. Emily mimicked him, her first few attempts clumsy and uneven, but Jack's patience never wavered. He adjusted her grip without a word of criticism, only a small smile that she began to recognize as genuine. "Not bad, Darlin. You're learning fast." The compliment, simple as it was, made her heart skip. She realized that he wasn't just tolerating her. He was acknowledging her effort, seeing her as an equal contributor to the ranch's work. Over meals, Emily and Jack began to talk more. Breakfasts of fried eggs and stale bread became a time for small conversation. Jack asked about her hometown, her family, and even her favorite books. Emily was hesitant at first, offering short answers and observing his reactions carefully. But Jack's easy humor, mixed with genuine interest, encouraged her to open up. For the first time since arriving, she felt heard. She noticed the twinkle in his eye when she spoke of her childhood, the rare pauses where he seemed to absorb her words, and the way he sometimes chuckled at her awkward attempts to describe city life. These exchanges, simple as they seemed, created a bridge between them, a bridge built on shared effort, conversation, and quiet companionship. The small shared victories extended beyond work and conversation. One afternoon, they rode the horses together across the open fields, Emily's initial fear of riding replaced by exhilaration and laughter. Jack guided her gently, holding the reins loosely as she learned to balance, and every stumble became a reason for playful teasing rather than criticism. "Careful, Darlin. Don't want you ending up in the mud," he joked. Emily laughed despite herself, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. She felt a connection with him here, amidst the wind, the grass, and the endless sky, a connection that made the fear she carried feel distant, if only for a while. Evenings brought moments of quiet reflection. Sitting on the porch, they watched the sun dip behind the mountains, the horizon painted with shades of orange and purple. Jack often shared stories of his past troubles he had faced on the ranch, adventures in the wild, and losses he rarely spoke of. Emily listened intently, seeing layers of depth and vulnerability beneath his gruff exterior. In return, she cautiously shared her own fears and dreams, feeling a growing trust in the man who had once seemed so intimidating. These shared moments were small but powerful. They built a rhythm between them, a sense of familiarity that made the ranch feel less daunting. Emily began to see that Jack's teasing line from the first day, "I don't bite unless," wasn't a threat at all. It was an invitation to understand him, to navigate this strange new world together, and perhaps, eventually, to trust him with more than just chores and small talk. By the end of these first shared experiences, Emily felt a subtle but unmistakable shift. Fear still lingered, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, it was accompanied by anticipation, curiosity, and the first flickers of affection. She was beginning to understand that trust and maybe even love could grow slowly in moments of shared labor, laughter, and quiet reflection, far from the familiar streets of her old life but deeply present in this vast, rugged new world. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of ranch life continued to ground Emily, yet beneath the routines, shadows of the past began to surface for both her and Jack. One evening, after a long day of chores, they sat on the porch in the amber glow of sunset, their hands wrapped around mugs of steaming tea. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of hay and distant pine. For the first time, Emily felt the space and safety to speak of the life she had left behind. I never expected to end up here," Emily began quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Back home, I had a small life, simple, safe, but it was falling apart. My family, we lost everything, and I didn't know what else to do." She paused, swallowing hard as the memories threatened to overwhelm her. "I thought, maybe this place could be a fresh start." Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time, Jack's expression softened in a way that was not teasing, not ruggedly humorous, but tender and attentive. Jack listened, his gaze steady and unflinching. "It's hard, Darlin, leaving everything you know behind." "I get that," he said slowly. Then, with a quiet vulnerability, he added, I've had my own share of losses. Lost my pa when I was young, my ma after that. I learned quick that you gotta fend for yourself out here. Ranching, surviving, it's not for the faint of heart." Emily turned to look at him fully, seeing the faint lines around his eyes, the hard-earned weariness in his hands, and the weight of solitude he carried even in his confident posture. The conversation, though heavy, brought a strange relief. For so long, Emily had felt isolated in her fears, thinking she alone carried the burden of loss and uncertainty. Yet here was Jack, a man she had once feared, revealing that he too bore scars and shadows. It made her feel less fragile, less alone, and the foundation of trust between them strengthened. They spoke long into the evening, sharing stories of hardship and resilience, of moments when life had seemed impossible, and yet, somehow, they had endured. In the following days, these revelations subtly changed the way they interacted. Emily's hesitation softened. She began to approach Jack with more ease, no longer constantly measuring her words or movements. She noticed the little habits of his, the way he hummed while mending fences, the gentle way he handled frightened animals, the soft chuckle that accompanied his rare moments of embarrassment. In turn, Jack seemed more protective without being overbearing, more patient without being condescending. The shadows of their pasts, rather than driving them apart, became a silent bridge, a shared understanding that life was fragile and trust had to be earned slowly. Yet, these past shadows also brought tension. Emily sometimes worried that revealing too much would make her appear weak or dependent. Jack, in turn, struggled with moments of guardedness, fearing that opening up too fully might expose his vulnerabilities. Their bond was growing, but the specters of past hurts reminded them both that trust was not instantaneous. It had to be nurtured carefully, piece by piece. By the end of this chapter of shared confessions, a subtle intimacy had begun to form. They were no longer simply employer and mail-order bride or guide and newcomer. They were two wounded souls navigating a harsh frontier together, each learning that the past did not define them, but could teach them resilience, empathy, and connection. Emily realized that Jack's teasing, protective, and occasionally rough demeanor was rooted in his own life experiences that mirrored, in different ways, her own fears and losses. As night fell and stars dotted the sky, Emily felt a quiet sense of hope. Perhaps, in this harsh and untamed world, there was room for more than survival. Perhaps there was room for understanding, trust, and the beginnings of love. And as she glanced at Jack, who was staring thoughtfully at the horizon, she sensed that he, too, was contemplating the possibilities that lay ahead, both in the ranch and in their growing, fragile connection. Life on the ranch had begun to settle into a rhythm, but with stability came new challenges. One morning, as Emily worked in the barn, a commotion at the edge of the property caught her attention. A rough-looking man on horseback, dressed in dusty clothes and wearing a cocky grin, rode onto the ranch without permission. Jack appeared immediately, his posture stiffening, the easy calm he usually carried replaced by a quiet tension. Emily felt a shiver of unease. This stranger's presence was unsettling, and she could sense Jack's protective instincts kicking in. The man introduced himself with a drawl that was all bravado. "Heard there's a new lady in town. Thought I'd see for myself." His gaze lingered on Emily a moment too long, and though he smiled, the leer in his eyes made her stomach twist. Emily instinctively stepped back, clutching a nearby broom as if it could shield her. Jack's hand rested on the railing, near the holster at his hip, his expression darkening with both anger and concern. "This is my land," Jack said firmly, his voice low and dangerous. "You ride in uninvited, you best keep your manners in check." Emily watched, heart pounding, as the tension mounted. She realized just how much she had come to rely on Jack's strength and presence. The stranger's arrogance and thinly veiled threat reminded her that the frontier was not forgiving. That danger could appear without warning, and that she was still vulnerable despite the small progress she had made in adapting to ranch life. She felt fear creeping back, but alongside it was a strange thrill, a recognition that life here was not only physically demanding but emotionally charged. Over the next few days, the troublemaker continued to lurk around the outskirts of the ranch, making sly comments whenever he crossed paths with Emily, teasing and testing her boundaries. Jack's protective behavior became more pronounced, and Emily noticed the subtle tension in his interactions with her. He would linger nearby when she was performing chores, his gaze scanning the horizon, and she began to sense both his worry and the deepening feelings he was reluctant to voice. At first, Emily felt flustered and unsure how to respond. Part of her was embarrassed by the attention. Part of her was secretly reassured that someone cared enough to protect her. The external threat also highlighted internal struggles. Emily wrestled with feelings of jealousy and frustration. She didn't like the idea of other men being interested in her, nor did she want to feel powerless. Jack, on the other hand, had to balance his desire to protect her with respect for her growing independence. The incident forced both of them to confront unspoken emotions: trust, attraction, and the fragile beginnings of love. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together near the northern pasture, the tension boiled over. The stranger reappeared, riding too close to the property line, provoking a confrontation. Jack's temper flared, and Emily felt the fear that had shadowed her since her arrival resurface, mingled with anger at the intruder's audacity. Jack confronted the man directly, his protective stance unyielding, while Emily realized she had to step back and allow him to handle the situation, an uncomfortable but necessary acknowledgement of both his authority and her reliance on him. By the end of this confrontation, the stranger rode off, begrudgingly respecting Jack's claim. Emily felt a mixture of relief and gratitude, recognizing Jack's steadfast loyalty. She also realized that the tension had drawn them closer. In facing a shared threat, trust deepened, emotions surfaced, and boundaries were tested. For the first time, Emily understood that love on the frontier would not be easy, that challenges, both internal and external, were inevitable, and that true connection often emerged through struggle, courage, and resilience. As night fell and the ranch settled into quiet again, Emily and Jack shared a rare moment on the porch, the air thick with unspoken words. Their hands brushed lightly as they sipped water, and Emily felt a subtle but unmistakable shift. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered by admiration, trust, and a burgeoning emotional bond that neither could ignore. The night air was thick with tension. A sudden summer storm had rolled in over the mountains, dark clouds blotting out the stars and a fierce wind rattling the wooden structures of the ranch. Rain pelted the roof in relentless sheets, and the low rumble of thunder echoed across the valley. Emily had been in the barn, securing the animals and checking fences, when a bolt of lightning illuminated a terrifying sight. One of the horses had broken free and was galloping frantically toward the unstable northern fence. Panic surged through her. If the horse escaped, it could be injured, or worse, run into the mountains and be lost forever. Jack was already outside, struggling against the wind as he tried to secure the fencing. "Emily, stay close," he shouted over the roar of the storm. She froze for a split second, the reality of her vulnerability in this unfamiliar land sinking in. But instinct overrode fear, and she sprinted toward him, clutching a lantern that swayed violently in the gusts. Her heart pounded as much from the fear of the storm as from the sight of Jack, his wide-brimmed hat soaked through, moving with a combination of skill and desperation to corral the panicked horse. The situation escalated quickly. The horse, terrified by the thunder, veered unpredictably, knocking over a section of fence. Emily nearly slipped in the mud, her hands sliding on the wetwood. She felt a surge of helplessness, and for a brief moment, panic threatened to paralyze her. Jack reached her side, gripping her arm with a reassuring strength that anchored her. "I've got you," he said, his voice calm but commanding, and for the first time Emily felt the raw, protective power of his presence in a way that went beyond playful teasing or quiet companionship. Together they managed to guide the horse back toward the barn, Emily holding the lantern high, her hands shaking but determined, and Jack speaking softly to the animal, coaxing it with patience and authority. Each step was a test of courage, resilience, and trust. The storm raging around them mirrored the chaos of their own fears and uncertainties. Emily realized that this was more than just a physical challenge. It was a test of her ability to rely on Jack, to trust him completely in a life-or-death moment. Once the horse was safely secured in the barn, Jack turned to Emily, his coat dripping and his face smeared with mud. She noticed the intensity in his gaze, a mixture of relief, pride, and unspoken emotion. "You did good," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate, as he brushed rain-soaked hair from her forehead. Emily's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, fear, adrenaline, and the storm's fury gave way to a fragile, electric connection. She realized that trust was no longer abstract, it had been forged in the crucible of danger. As they returned to the house, drenched and exhausted, Emily couldn't help but notice the way Jack stayed close, silently ensuring she was safe before tending to himself. The storm's roar had faded into distant rumbles, and the wind had calmed, leaving a quiet, almost reverent stillness. They moved in tandem, a rhythm formed from shared struggle, and Emily felt a warmth and security that had been absent in the early days of her arrival. The storm had tested not only their courage but also the strength of their bond, revealing the depths of mutual reliance and emotional connection. That night, as Emily dried off by the fire, she reflected on the events. The fear she had felt earlier was replaced by admiration, gratitude, and a spark of something new, an awareness that Jack was more than a protector. He was becoming someone she could care for deeply. And for Jack, seeing Emily face danger with courage and determination, even in the midst of fear, awakened a growing respect and fondness. The storm, violent and relentless, had become the catalyst for a pivotal transformation, the first true recognition of trust, reliance, and the stirring of love between them. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch drenched but calm. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass, and a pale morning sun filtered through lingering clouds, casting the landscape in a soft, forgiving light. After the chaos of the night before, Emily felt a quiet shift within herself. The adrenaline and fear that had dominated her days were gradually giving way to a fragile but undeniable sense of trust in the land, in the routines of ranch life, and, most importantly, in Jack. That morning, as they tended to the remaining chores, Emily noticed how naturally she moved alongside him. She no longer hesitated when following his instructions, no longer feared making mistakes, and no longer questioned his intentions. Jack, in turn, adjusted his approach: less teaching, more partnership. He allowed her to make decisions, to handle tasks independently, and he praised her when she succeeded. Each small affirmation, each shared glance, strengthened the bond that had begun to form during their shared struggles. There was a particular moment that marked a turning point. Jack asked Emily to lead one of the horses to the pasture, a task she had once found terrifying. Her hands were steady, her voice calm as she spoke softly to the animal. Jack followed behind, offering guidance only when necessary, his presence a reassuring anchor rather than a controlling force. Emily realized that she could trust not just his physical protection, but his respect for her growing competence. She was no longer a passive participant in this life. She was an active partner, capable and confident. Their conversations also deepened. Without the distractions of fear or immediate danger, Emily and Jack shared more about their hopes, their values, and their personal quirks. Emily spoke of her dreams beyond survival, of small pleasures, the joy of learning new skills, and the quiet hope of belonging somewhere. Jack revealed moments of vulnerability, stories of loneliness, and reflections on the lessons he had learned from hardship. Each revelation was met with patience and understanding, not judgment. Emily realized that trust was not merely about physical safety. It was about emotional openness, the willingness to reveal oneself without fear of rejection. Even humor became a tool of intimacy. Jack's teasing, once sharp and intimidating, now felt gentle and inclusive. He made light of small mishaps on the ranch, and Emily found herself laughing freely, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. They joked, argued playfully, and shared quiet silences that were comfortable rather than awkward. Trust, she realized, was as much about these small, everyday moments as it was about surviving storms and taming animals. That afternoon they sat on the porch together, sipping water and watching the clouds drift lazily over the mountains. Emily allowed herself to lean slightly against Jack, a gesture of closeness she would have previously avoided. He didn't comment, didn't flinch. He simply placed an arm around her shoulders, a protective yet gentle gesture that spoke volumes. For the first time, Emily felt safe in her own emotions around him. She could express worry, relief, and even affection without fear of ridicule or dismissal. By the day's end, Emily understood that trust had become the foundation of their relationship. It was earned slowly through shared labor, mutual respect, and moments of vulnerability. Fear no longer dominated her perception of Jack. It had been replaced by reliance, admiration, and the first tender stirrings of love. And Jack, witnessing her courage, growth, and openness, began to soften in ways he had long denied himself, recognizing that this young woman, once frightened and uncertain, had become someone he could depend on, admire, and perhaps even love. The ranch, vast and untamed, mirrored their relationship. Both required patience, resilience, and care. And as Emily watched the sun dip behind the distant mountains, she felt a profound certainty. In Jack, she had found not only a partner in survival, but a man she could trust completely, heart and soul. By the time autumn hinted at its arrival, cooler mornings, golden grasses, and migrating birds, something within Emily had shifted permanently. The ranch no longer felt foreign or intimidating. It felt lived in, familiar, almost sacred. The creaking porch boards, the windmill's rhythmic groan, the scent of hay and horses, these sounds and smells had become the background music of her healing. But more than the land itself, it was Jack who had transformed everything. She began noticing him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to before, not just as the man who saved her, protected her, or taught her, but as someone she genuinely wanted to know. His laugh, rare but rich, his steady hands as he worked, the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke, and the gentleness he tried so hard to hide behind gruff humor. Every small detail etched itself into her heart until affection stopped being accidental and became undeniable. The moment Emily fully realized her feelings came unexpectedly during a simple afternoon task. Jack was repairing a fence, sleeves rolled up, dust on his face, concentration narrowing his eyes. Emily approached with a water canteen, and when he reached for it, their fingers brushed. The touch was brief, innocent, but her pulse reacted like lightning. She looked up and found Jack already watching her, his expression soft, almost reverent. It was then she saw it, longing, hope, and fear mirroring her own. Neither spoke of it, not yet. But after that, everything changed. Their interactions grew slower, more intentional. Jack lingered when handing her tools. Emily found excuses to be near him, helping with saddles, organizing supplies, walking the fence line by his side. Their conversations slid from practical matters to personal ones, favorite childhood memories, private insecurities, dreams they never voiced aloud. They spoke quietly, as though afraid the wind might reveal their confessions too soon. Still, doubt lingered. Emily wondered if she was misreading the signs, if Jack's kindness was simply duty or habit. Jack feared pushing too hard too fast, remembering the fear she carried when she first arrived. Neither wanted to break what was so carefully forming. The emotional turning point came one evening at dusk. They sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky bleed into lavender and gold. Crickets hummed, the ranch dogs slept at their feet, and the world felt suspended in a peaceful, fragile stillness. Emily leaned into Jack, not out of fear, exhaustion, or uncertainty, but comfort, belonging. This time she didn't pull away. Jack exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of tension. "Emily," he murmured, voice low and almost unsure. "You're not afraid of me anymore." She looked up at him. Really looked at the man who offered her safety without conditions, patience without expectation, respect without demand. "I never should have been," she whispered. "You've never given me a reason to be." Jack's jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his face. "I've wanted to tell you something for a while now," he said, voice roughened by nerves. "But I didn't want to scare you off." Her heart thudded. "You won't." He reached for her hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they'd always belonged that way. That simple touch, chosen, mutual, fearless, was their first confession. Emily felt warmth bloom in her chest, steady and sure. She didn't need grand declarations to understand what it meant. Jack cared, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. And she felt the same. The knowledge settled inside her like roots finally finding soil. They didn't kiss not yet. Some moments deserved patience. But in that quiet twilight, breathing the same air, hands joined, hearts steady, they both understood. They were no longer strangers bound by contract or circumstance. They were choosing each other. And love real, steady, lasting had already begun. Winter announced itself, slowly longer nights, crisp mornings, and a thin veil of frost glittering across the ranch fields. Emily woke each day with a steadier heart, no longer weighed down by uncertainty or fear. Life with Jack had taken on a natural rhythm, one woven with ease, trust, shared responsibility, and quiet affection. What once felt temporary now felt permanent, rooted, inevitable. Jack felt the shift too. He noticed Emily humming while cooking, laughing easily with the ranch hands, riding confidently across the range, and speaking with authority when planning repairs or tending to livestock. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And this land, once only his, now carried her imprint everywhere. Yet one thing remained unspoken: their marriage. Legally, she was his wife. Emotionally, spiritually, wholeheartedly, she wanted to be. But they had never celebrated, never vowed, never chosen it together. Their arrangement had begun with desperation, not love. Now Jack wanted to give her something new: choice, ceremony, joy. He spent days quietly preparing, carving a small wooden ring box from juniper, smoothing it until it held the scent of the mountains. He spoke with the local preacher, arranged a gathering, and most nerve-wracking of all, planned the words he wanted to say. Jack wasn't a poet, wasn't a man of flowery language. But he loved her, and he wanted her to hear it. Emily sensed something shifting but didn't press. She trusted him, trusted the silence, the build-up, the way he looked at her with a tenderness he no longer bothered hiding. Her affection had grown into certainty, a calm, grounded love that warmed her even on the coldest mornings. The proposal came on a quiet evening, not dramatic or choreographed, but deeply theirs. They stood near the horse corral, lantern light flickering across snow-dusted ground, their breath visible in the cold air. Jack cleared his throat once, twice before finally speaking. "Emily, when you came here, you didn't owe me anything. I didn't expect anything either. I just wanted you safe." She turned toward him, heart already fluttering. But somewhere between fixing fences, chasing cattle, and you laughing at my terrible cooking." His mouth curved. "I realized my life was better with you in it, not because you had nowhere else to go, but because you chose to stay." Her eyes stung, but she didn't look away. Jack reached into his coat pocket and opened the hand-carved box. Inside lay a simple silver band, not flashy, not expensive, but polished with care. "So I'm asking, not as the man who sent for you, not as the man the papers say you married, but as the man who loves you. Emily, will you marry me for real? By choice?" Emily didn't hesitate, not even for a breath. Yes. The word came out strong, steady, overflowing with gratitude and love. "Yes, Jack." His relief was visible, a soft, stunned smile transforming his usually guarded face. He slid the ring onto her finger, hands trembling slightly, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him with all the certainty she once lacked. Their wedding was small, just ranch hands, neighbors, the preacher, a supper table filled with food everyone contributed to, but it was joyful, warm, and undeniably theirs. Emily walked toward Jack not with fear, but with radiant confidence. Jack met her like a man who had finally found what he never knew he was missing. Their vows were simple promises of partnership, patience, respect, and laughter, but stronger than any contract or circumstance. And when Jack finally kissed her slow, reverent, deeply earned, the ranch erupted in cheers. Emily belonged not because she needed shelter, but because she had chosen a life she loved. Jack, once solitary and resigned, now had a partner soft where he was rough, brave where he was weary, hopeful where he had once been cautioned. Together, they built a future rooted in love, not survival. A home, not a bargain. And every time Jack teased, "Darlin, I don't bite unless," Emily just kissed him and murmured, "Maybe I'll like that." Their story wasn't a rescue. It was a beginning,